been a volatile season for my Florida Gators, and coming off a disappointing loss to Ole Miss, but in many ways too, there's a lot of things to be out in some regard if you want to be an optimist about this season, if you just simply want to give up hope, tank, and see who your next head coach is. Either way, it's good with me. But nevertheless, I mean, when I watched this game versus Ole Miss this week, especially bouncing back from the pathetic performance against Kentucky, the one thing that you can say about this team is they're playing a lot harder for Billy Gonzales, a lot harder than I kind of anticipated in a lot of ways, right? Because there's just so many different question marks with this Florida program right now, right? Because you can look at this from a couple different directions. If you're just talking strictly about on the football field, one of the key questions is going to be in terms of DJ Lagway, for example. There's some people like myself who thinks he has a lot of raw athleticism. He's got a cannon for an arm, but at the same time, too, he does struggle with accuracy in terms of some of those intermediate throws. His footwork isn't necessarily on point a lot of the time. And unlike last season, he's just not playing with as much poise and as much discipline. And it just seems like a lot of times he's trying to force plays that simply aren't there. A really good example I thought of is the interception that Lagway had in the second half versus the Ole Miss game, where he was essentially throwing across his body into double coverage. Then the Ole Miss guy picked it off right there and essentially sealed Florida's fate in that game. But at the same time, too, it's not just Lagway, too, right? Because there were conversations about Lagway's health even going into the season. He had I think it was a lingering ankle issue. Then his shoulder was screwed up. And a lot of different things happened there. And, I even said on the show that, hey, I really didn't think it would be that big of a deal. I mean, hey, people don't play in spring ball all the time. Maybe he skipped a couple practices and then fast forward to now. And I guess you can kind of make the argument to some degree that those issues kind of persisted into the regular season too. And I think you could also argue that a big part of why DJ Lagway stayed this year was because of Billy Napier and him being able to develop quarterbacks too, and his obvious success as a offensive coordinator too, whether it was at Louisiana. I mean, he was the head coach there too, but also you can even date back to when he was the offensive coordinator at Clemson too. But nevertheless, Florida, they dropped to 3-7, third straight loss. And, it's one of those kind of situations too, where, there's just so many different things that Florida's kind of trying to put together right now too. Because you have the issue with DJ Lagway. I've mentioned on the show about Jaden Bowe. I've always thought he's just been a sensational player. I think they fail to utilize him as well as I think a lot of other SEC teams use their running backs. Could be on pace this year for 1,000 yards if he gets. I think he's at 800 yards now, so he only needs an extra. I don't really think he's going to get 200-yard games versus Tennessee and Florida State, but I mean it's certainly possible because I mean it'd be nice to see another 1,000-yard rusher, which we haven't had since 2015, and it's so obvious that the reason why this Florida offense looks so one-dimensional is because all these defenses are just simply stacking the box, and you're forcing DJ Lagway to throw the ball. And we saw some success of that, right? Because DJ Lagway went 9 for 17 for 155 yards and a touchdown in the first half of that Ole Miss game. And it genuinely seemed like things were kind of clicking together, too, in terms of everything going on. And I said it time and time again on the show, they have to find ways to run the ball more. And, they're doing the best they can with that, right? I think Billy Gonzales and this offensive staff, I think there are iterations of them being able to run the ball a little bit more, especially with Lagway struggles. I think they kind of had to accept themselves like, hey, we have to find different ways to move the ball down the field. But especially too, when you have guys like Vernell Brown, you have guys like J. Michael Stravant from transfer from UCLA. You have all these different guys Eugene Wilson, but I'm pretty sure he's hurt now. Then you have Hayden Hansen too, and a couple other dudes off the top of my head that I can't necessarily think of. But nevertheless, I mean, this team offensively, it's just very frustrating to watch because although once Billy Napier got fired, a lot of things kind of fell to the wayside. But if you look at what we have foundationally, there's a lot more to work with than I think people expect. Now, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen in terms of, who the next head coaching hire is going to be. I think Florida kind of went all in on Lane Kiffin, but there's been rumors about Jed Fish becoming head coach as well. And I don't want to get into that on the show because I like to focus on what I'm seeing on the football field. I don't want to spend time focusing on head coaching searches in the middle of the season. But nevertheless, I mean, when you look at this team too, and I'll touch on the defense now too as well, but I think Florida community here, I think we have to show Ron Roberts a lot more love than we have, right? Because last year we saw Florida kind of taking that next step in terms of, hey, they brought in a lot of solid transfers, particularly in the secondary. That pass rush was really getting home last year, particularly in the latter half of the year of last year. And even this year, I think they're still doing a solid job. I don't think they're as explosive and as much of a key component to their defense as they were last year, perhaps. But nevertheless, Florida's defense has played their ass off this year. And there's been so many different times where I can think of where Florida's defense has gotten a lot more critical stops than people think. I remember thinking about in the Georgia game where they got a couple key third down stops. I think of the couple red zone stops that Florida's defense got versus Ole Miss. Now, granted, there was some pretty questionable play calling to some degree if you look at from the Ole Miss sideline, but nevertheless, a stop is a stop. But when all things said and done, whoever comes into Florida as the next head coach has a lot to work with. Now, granted, we don't know who's going to be transferring, who's going to be staying, but there's a couple things that are for certain. One, Florida spent a lot more in NIL. They certainly have the budget to be able to pay assistants more, and their facilities have definitely have had a dramatic upgrade too, which in comparison to the SEC, they have definitely have been lackluster in that department because back in 2021, 2022, when NIL was kind of first being introduced and being, talked about and whatnot, a lot of schools had to kind of make that decision in terms of, okay, are we going to be the type of team that invests in the facilities and the actual school and the athletic fields, or are we going to double down on NIL and essentially pay to play type of thing? And I think now Florida's kind of being able to get better with finding that balance. Certainly the collectives are definitely playing a big part of that, as well as being able to pay athletes directly. That's always a big help. But, Florida still has a lot to look forward to this year. They can still bounce back and have a 5-7 season versus a Tennessee team that I think certainly does have some strengths and I think are a solid team. But, Florida has had Tennessee's number over the past couple years as well. And, dating back to 2003, Florida's actually won the last 10 games versus Tennessee at the Swamp. So I think there is a realistic and a really good opportunity for Billy Gonzales to kind of really put his spin on being able to maybe make himself a candidate for the job, or most importantly, just being able to play for pride and being able to sell the program for next season. So there's an aspect of that too. But also Tennessee has been just pretty much what we thought they would be. We knew that they were kind of take a step back compared to last year. Nobody was really entirely sure what would happen with Joey Aguilar. A lot of their top receivers either graduated or transferred. But this will be a really fun matchup for Florida. And I think there's a couple things that Florida really needs to kind of do in order to be able to win this game. First and foremost, I said it a couple seconds ago. You got to feed. You got to feel. You got to feed Jaden Bow. Now say that 3 times fast. I mean, the guy's been an absolute monster this year. He's a lot more quick than people expect. He is a super patient runner, is explosive, and can also break tackles, right? Because he's had 3 100-yard rushing games this season. He, like I said before, he's averaging about 96 per game, but needs another 200 yards to get to 1,000. Like I said before, I think that'd be a huge selling point for Florida in terms of the recruiting cycle too, because definitely with Billy Napier not being there, they definitely took a little bit of a hit just in terms of being able to sell the program. But a fun fact is no one decommitted after Billy Napier being fired. And I think that's kind of telling in that way that you can make the argument about, well, is this Florida? Are kids going to Florida necessarily for the school, the academics, the history, and the prestige? Or are you going there because of the head coach? And I think it's very telling when schools like Florida, Auburn, and LSU don't lose any commits whatsoever. And then you have the Oklahoma States, the Arkansas, and the Penn States of the world who are losing 10 plus commits when their coach gets fired. Now, obviously, all those situations are different, and you never know the behind the scenes antics in terms of what goes down. But Florida, it'll be fascinating to see kind of how Florida navigates this and how they kind of take things to the next level too. But I mentioned the rushing attack a couple seconds ago. I think the offensive line definitely deserves a lot more love than I think people expect. I think for the most part, they've given DJ Lagway enough time to be able to go through those progressions, be able to make those reads. So I don't necessarily worry about that issue. But I think at the same time too, I think the defense right now is the bread and butter of this team. It is the legitimate strength of this team in order for them to kind of be able to really kind of pull off an upset and spoil Tennessee's season once again. Now they do play Florida State, which that's always a fun game for anybody who lives in Florida, such as myself. But nevertheless, my 3 keys to the game: one, they got to be able to rush the ball and not rely so much on DJ Lagway. 2, this defense has to go home and be able to pressure Joey Aguilar. And number 3, most importantly, to stop turning the freaking ball over, stop forcing plays, really be patient,